He was just a waiter, someone most people barely noticed, someone trained to stay invisible. But in one impossible moment, he did something no one expected and no one was ready to forgive. A single act meant to save a life turned into a storm of judgment, whispers, and outrage that spread far beyond that room. Because to some, it wasn't about what he did, it was about who he was. And in a city that prides itself on justice, the truth was quickly buried beneath assumptions. The question is, when saving a life becomes a crime in the eyes of others, what does that really say about us? Every night, he moved quietly through the polished floors of one of New York's most exclusive restaurants, carrying plates worth more than his weekly paycheck. To the guests, he was just another black waiter, present but unseen. But outside of that uniform was a man who had worked twice as hard just to be allowed in the room, someone who understood that one mistake could cost him everything. He kept his head down, followed every rule, and avoided attention at all costs. Because attention, in his world, often came with consequences, especially in a place where power, wealth, and perception mattered more than truth. That night seemed no different. The restaurant buzzed with elite guests, quiet laughter, and the soft clink of glass. Among them sat a young woman surrounded by luxury, completely unaware that within minutes, everything around her would spiral out of control. And when it did, the only person close enough to act was the one no one was really watching. It started with a shift in the air, subtle at first, almost unnoticeable. The laughter at the table faded into confusion as the young woman's posture changed. Her hand moved to her throat, her breathing suddenly uneven, strained. At first, people assumed it was nothing. A cough, a moment, something that would pass. But it didn't. Within seconds, her movements turned desperate. The glass in her hand slipped, shattering against the floor. Chairs scraped back, voices rose, but no one moved close enough to understand what was really happening. They hesitated, unsure, unprepared, unwilling to step into something they couldn't control. From across the room, he saw it, not as chaos, but as danger, immediate and real. His steps were fast, instinctive, cutting through the hesitation that held everyone else back. But as he approached, something else followed him. Eyes. Dozens of them. Watching. Questioning. Judging before he even reached her. Because to them, he wasn't a responder. He wasn't someone who belonged in that moment of urgency. He was just a waiter, and, in their minds, already out of place. Still, he didn't stop. The woman's body was weakening, her breath shorter, more fragile. The people around her looked frozen, caught between fear and disbelief. And in that space, where seconds mattered more than anything, he made a choice. One that would change everything. He dropped to her level, ignoring the murmurs that began to ripple through the room. His focus locked on her. On the urgency, the danger, the life slipping away right in front of him. There was no time to think about consequences, no time to ask permission. Only time to act. And he did. The moment it happened, the room shifted again, but not in relief. In shock. Not the kind that comes from witnessing someone being saved, but the kind that comes from seeing something they didn't expect, something they weren't ready to accept. The silence that followed wasn't calm. It was heavy, charged with disbelief. Then came the whispers, low at first, confused, but quickly turning sharp. Questions turned into assumptions. Assumptions turned into judgment. And judgment into something far more dangerous. Because what he saw as a life or death decision, others saw through a completely different lens. And in that moment, as the woman's breathing finally returned, as life slowly came back in her body, the attention didn't shift to relief. It shifted to him. Phones began to rise. Eyes hardened. The narrative was already being written, and he wasn't the hero in it. He stood there, the weight of the room pressing in, realizing something was wrong. Not with what he had done, but with how it was being seen. And just as quickly as the crisis had begun, a different kind of storm was forming. One that he couldn't stop. One that was about to follow him far beyond those restaurant doors. The room didn't calm down. It turned. Within moments, security pushed through the crowd, their focus not on the woman who had just regained her breath, but on him. Hands reached for his arms. pulling him back as if he had done something wrong. The same people who had frozen in fear seconds earlier now stood firm in judgment, their eyes filled with suspicion instead of gratitude. Phones were everywhere now, recording, zooming in, capturing only a fraction of the truth. To them, the image was simple: a black waiter, too close, too involved, crossing a line they believed he had no right to cross. He tried to steady himself, his mind racing, replaying the moment over and over. He knew what he had done. He knew why he had done it. But none of that seemed to matter anymore. Not here. Not now. Because the story had already changed. Across the room, the woman sat upright, still recovering, her breath uneven but alive. The one person who could explain everything wasn't being heard. The noise around her swallowed any clarity, any truth, as louder voices took over. And then came the man. Powerful, wealthy, untouchable. Her father. His presence alone shifted the energy in the room. Conversation stopped. Eyes turned. And when his gaze locked onto the waiter, it wasn't confusion. It was something colder. Something final. In that instant, nothing else mattered. Not the life that had just been saved. Not the urgency of what had happened. Only perception. Only status. Only who he was and who the waiter was not. Security tightened their grip, preparing to remove him completely, as if erasing him would fix what they believed had been broken. The weight of it all pressed down on him. The stares, the assumptions, the silence of those who knew better but said nothing. And just as he was being pulled away, as the truth slipped further out of reach, one question hung heavier than anything else. Would the man who saved her life be remembered or erased? He wasn't taken out in handcuffs, but he might as well have been. By the time he stepped outside, the story had already spread beyond those walls. Short clips, blurred angles, and half-truths flooded screens across the city. In seconds, he had been turned from a man who acted in urgency into a symbol of something he never was. The restaurant suspended him without questions. Calls went unanswered. His name, once unnoticed, was now being spoken, but not with respect. And yet, the truth refused to stay buried. Days later, when the noise began to settle, a different version surfaced. One that showed the full moment. The panic, the hesitation of everyone else. And him, the only one who moved when it mattered most. It didn't spread as fast. It didn't trend the same way. But it was real. The woman he saved recovered. Her life continued. But his had already been altered. Not just by what he did, but by how quickly the world decided who he was allowed to be. Because this was never just about one moment in a restaurant. It was about how easily humanity is overlooked when it comes in the wrong form. How quickly assumptions replace truth. How often the people who step up are the same ones pushed down. He did everything right and still paid the price. So the question isn't just what happened that night. It's this. If doing the right thing can still cost someone everything, how many others have we already misjudged without ever knowing the truth?